Welcome to this week's Eternal Monday. We're going to take a different approach to Eternal Monday today. We're going to start looking at the Eternal Format ban list in a little mini-series. I was going to say is called the Eternal Format ban list explained. Obviously, we're not going to cover the entirety of the ban list all in one video. That's just too much. When we're looking at over 25 years of cards from the game, since the game first debuted in English in 1999, it's a lot of cards, and by extension, there's a fairly decently big ban list that goes with it. As of the recording of this video, there are approximately 150 cards on that ban list. I don't expect it to balloon too much bigger, but it will gradually gain more cards over time, just as the game gains more cards in general. Again, you're looking at a roughly 150 banned cards with roughly 15,000 card pool. So I think it's fairly reasonable considering a 25-year history, and a lot of these cards were just not designed to work with each other, or were designed for very different eras of the game. So with that said, that's kind of the introduction to the Eternal Format ban list here in this video. If you're not familiar with the Eternal Format, this is probably going to be a little confusing to you, but the general idea behind the Eternal Format is that you get to play with cards from the entire history of the Pokemon trading card game, all the way back to the original base set. The exception is, unlike the Unlimited format where you just play with whatever cards are available to you, there is an actual ban list here so that the gameplay is a little less one-sided. There's actually a back and forth. Anyway, with that said, let's jump into our first entry on today's list. Today's list is going to start out with Professor Oak. Professor Oak is a card that frequently gets asked about. I just don't understand. They say, why is Professor Oak on the ban list? It's just Professor's research. One thing you're going to know, especially about a lot of cards that released prior to the EX era, is a lot of them are item cards or are treated like item cards. And Professor Oak is one of those cards. Professor Oak has never received any sort of errata that has made it a supporter card. It has never received a new print of it that was tournament legal that would make it a supporter card. And as a result, it is still an item card functionally, which means that this card, while it has the same effect as Professor Sycamore, Professor Juniper, or Professor's Research, it could be used 4 times in the same turn, in addition to something like Professor Sycamore, which makes the draw effect on a card like this way overpowered for anything in any unlimited space, right? There's just too many combos that you could successfully pull off with draw this strong. And by extension, another card that is also tied to that same idea is actually Gambler. Gambler is a similar item-based draw card that has a very strong effect for draw. You're not discard drawing here. Here you are flipping a coin after shuffling your hand into your deck and seeing whether you are going to draw 1 card or 8. The cool thing I would say about Gambler is that you kind of get the flip side of preserving those resources. So let's say you flip tails, right? You think, oh, well, you're only getting 1 card. Not that big a deal. It's just an item card. So you lose out on that 1 card, but your trade-off is, 50% chance you get 8 cards instead. Well, the thing is, even if you flip tails, because of a lot of cards in the card pool in Eternal, and even in Standard, a card like this existing would be crazy, you can draw a lot more than just that 1 card. So you have cards like Claydol with its Cosmic Power, Poke Power, and even though seasonal play in Eternal, cards like the Barrel in current Standard format with its Industrious Incisors ability can let you pretty much recover and use the effect of the Gambler card with no real repercussions if you flip tails. So that's a big part of the reason why cards like that are banned. So basically, if it has a supporter level of draw on an item card, there's an extremely high likelihood that it's banned, simply because it's just too strong and too fast for a more balanced format. So on that note, there's also another card we'll look at here for a moment. This is going to be Misty's Wrath. Misty's Wrath is also treated as an item card in Unlimited and the Eternal formats. And it has not just that hyper aggressive draw, where you're looking at the top 7 cards of your deck and then pulling 2 of them into your hand, but it's also allowing you to rapidly filter a lot out of your deck and straight into the discard pile. So there are decks like Sandaconda, or even more popular decks like the United Wings or Night March builds that can take advantage of this strong, overly aggressive draw and overly aggressive filtering of the deck. Cards like Battle Compressor are already very, very, very strong, but you get cards like Misty's Wrath that are treated as item cards when you have equivalent effects on supporter cards like Hapu and Explorer's Guidance. You just got to keep in mind that when those effects are that strong, and they are on item cards, they can allow a deck to turbo far faster than it should be able to. And if a deck is built with turboing like that in mind, they're not really that concerned about resource management, which kind of detracts from the whole purpose of actually playing the game. So that is a big reason why Misty's Wrath was hit. And then up next is the Clefable from Jungle and base set 2. So it was reprinted in base set 2, originally printed in Jungle. In this case, Clefable was actually hit because of a mistranslation that affects the way the game is played. Unfortunately, Metronome is not worded very well thanks to Wizards of the Coast. This is not, of course, the only instance of a card being mistranslated. There are a bunch of them, but when a card is banned in the Eternal format for a mistranslation issue, it's banned because the mistranslation is so egregious, so horrible that it breaks the game or breaks the way the game is supposed to be played. In this case, for Metronome, you'll look at a phrase that Wizards of the Coast decided to add that says, "and anything else required in order to use this attack." So ultimately, that phrase didn't exist in the Japanese, in the original text, and you get some really broken interactions that shouldn't happen, basically shouldn't be able to exist because of this. So yes, this is a stage 1 Pokemon, but at the same time, it's able to copy really powerful effects like Radiant Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken. Now it doesn't have to discard anything in order to use Moonlight Shuriken. And it can even copy stuff like Giratina V-Star Star Requiem with no cards in the Lost Zone, because the effect is saying that it does not need to meet the requirements of the attack in order to use the attack. So Star Requiem in this case is just immediately used. You are going to end up flipping your V-Star power, but then the question comes up, well, can you even use it if you've already used your V-Star power? So you're now getting into the rules breaking or rules confusion situation here. And then even if you're ignoring the V-Star power completely, there is Sableye, which also would normally require 10 cards in the Lost Zone. But because Metronome is saying, okay, you don't need that, now Sableye can use Lost Mine with nothing in the Lost Zone. Or rather, you can copy Sableye's Lost Mine with nothing in the Lost Zone. Which, yes, this is somewhat niche and somewhat situational, but at a certain point, it becomes just good running like a 1/1 tech, or even a 0/1 tech if you have Ditto Prism Star in the deck, just so that you can abuse whatever Pokemon your opponent puts out in play. And because it's really not how the card was designed, not how it was intended to be played, the card's been hit, and we're avoiding the game warp that is caused by Metronome. The next card we're going to talk about today is Kecleon. Kecleon was legal briefly in Eternal format. It has an extremely cool Pokebody called Colorful Body that allows it to be grass, fire, water, lightning, psychic, fighting, darkness, metal, and colorless all at once. So you're 9 different types. And you're thinking, what could that possibly break? That doesn't make any sense. This card is so innocent. How is this guy breaking the game? A couple of ways. Mostly the biggest way that it was abused before it got banned was the Rainbow Road style of attack that can be found on Sylveon VMAX with Max Harmony. So you're able to basically immediately with a single Pokemon on your bench add an additional 8 types to your field. So you don't even need something like Skyfield. With Kecleon, you just drop it down. Immediately you have another 240 damage. It's a lot. Just to be able to throw a single Pokemon down and immediately be able to basically max out your damage with Max Harmony. If you had like a fairy type Pokemon, you could get even higher, but ultimately for one Pokemon drop, you're drastically increasing your damage for basically nothing. Yes, Sylveon VMAX is a 3 price Pokemon, but what does it matter when you can even run Xerneas to do the same thing? You have access to cards that allow you to power up Rainbow Force very easily, like Max Elixir. You're doing effectively the same idea with a single prize Pokemon, a similar attack cost, and it's just way easy to get extremely high amounts of damage for basically no investment. So that's why That's why Kecleon was hit in large part. And it's actually interesting to note in Japan's Palace or Hall of Fame format, the same Kecleon was hit, and I suspect it was probably for much the same reason, because it does break cards like Sylveon and Xerneas. And another thing that's kind of interesting to note, this could have theoretically seen play. It never did end up seeing play, but it could have. If that Kecleon were still legal, it could be played with Radiant Eevee. If you're sufficiently able to control your opponent's board such that they wouldn't be able to disrupt your hand very easily, then Radiant Eevee basically becomes a way for you to immediately search like 8 cards every turn right out of your deck, right? Or up to 8 every turn, which basically would make Radiant Eevee one of the best control cards in the format. And that's pretty intense considering it's a 90 HP Pokemon. Very squishy 90 HP Pokemon, but if you could, again, in theory, prevent your opponent from being able to attack Radiant Eevee, from being able to disrupt your hand, then Radiant, and if you're drawing, or if you're searching for up to 8 cards each turn, you're probably going to be able to pull that off. So, Radiant Eevee just becomes a menace with a card like Kecleon. And there are obviously going to be other examples that aren't included here, but these are some of the more glaring examples of cards where a seemingly innocent Kecleon becomes a huge problem. The next one are the babies. Ultimately, this comes down to they're just not fun to play against. So if you're not familiar with these babies, and it's not all babies that are banned, it's just babies with the baby rule specifically. So if you look at this Cleffa, for example, it says if this baby Pokemon is your active Pokemon and your opponent tries to attack, your opponent flips a coin before doing anything required in order to use that attack. If tails, your opponent's turn ends without an attack. So basically, this means that if your opponent wants to attack, even with something like Call for Family, or Eek on another Cleffa, for example, you have to flip a coin, and if it's tails, your turn just ends and you don't get an attack. That is horribly unfun to play against, and ultimately just results in a not very fun gaming experience. And if anyone who's played a decent amount of Neo will tell you, the baby rule sucked a lot, and I don't really want people to have to play with that baby rule. And what's worse still is that the baby rule could be used, or abused rather, in conjunction with control and stall cards to just make control a lot better than it probably should be in a format where it's already pretty good, even with a lot of the bans that help to keep it in check. So baby rule basically is just to make the game fun, because the baby rule it's too much. It's way, way too much. And so there are roughly a dozen, I think, baby Pokemon that are banned because of the baby rule in particular. It seems like a silly rule for bans, but again, if you know anyone that has played a significant amount of the Neo era or the other era, I think it was the X era that had the baby rule, I'm pretty sure they'll tell you, yeah, that rule kind of sucked and it's not great to play with. And then the last cards that we're going to talk about today on the ban list, explained or explored, however you want to phrase it, is Palkia and Dialga Legend. You're looking at this and you're going, it's a 2-prizer with only 160 HP that you have to have 2 pieces to put into play. How in the heck is this possibly broken? I couldn't find the image to include it on this slide, but their time control attack absolutely can be abused. So if you can copy time control, or if you can just repeatedly use time control, which you can do because there's no limitation on the number of times you can use it in a game, you can just keep repeatedly adding prize cards to your opponent's board. And they will never be able to recover. Even after like 4 or 6, it's probably already going to get to a point where they just really can't win the game anymore, because there's so many prize cards that they have to take. So if you're able to play Palkia and Dialga Legend in such a way that allows you to control your opponent's board state, that prevent them from being able to knock you out, or even just slowing them down enough that you can get a couple of the time controls off early on, you're pretty well set to win and can't possibly lose because of it. So in this case, it's a game warping mechanic, and it's pretty easily repeatable with a lot of the cards that are in the Eternal format. So you have things like Metal Saucer, you have things like the Bronzong, I believe it is, the Metal Link's Bronzong. You also have the Bronzong that moves metal energy around. So even if you're discarding energy off of this time control attack, which you are required to do, you're still adding those top 2 cards to your opponent's deck, or from their deck to their prize cards pretty much every turn, because you're able to just reattach with Metal Links and move those energy back up. So you just kind of a quick loop and constantly adding those prize cards back. And unlike Pokemon V Union, you could just bring back Palkia and Dialga Legend, even if it's knocked out, and bring it back and use it again. So Palkia and Dialga Legend got hit for that reason. Basically, it creates a situation where your opponent cannot possibly win, because if they cannot keep up with the prize cards that have been added to their deck, or added to their prizing from their deck, There's just no way for them to win, and it's too repeatable. Effects like this, like injection, I think it's injection GX, just adds a single prize card. No, I don't think it's injection. I think it's circuitries. It basically just adds a prize card to their prizes. They're GX attacks. They're one time per game, whereas this is loopable. And that's a problem when you have a format with an enormous amount of consistency and just an enormous amount of various ways to power it up and repeatedly use an effect like this. So that is the basics of today's kind of Eternal format ban list explained. Of course, you know, only like 6 things covered today, but I want to kind of take them gradually, take them one by one, kind of just explore why they're banned, what kinds of things there are in the ban list. I think as we go through more of these, you'll probably understand just kind of off the bat why certain cards have been banned, why certain cards have been hit. You know, you see the reasonings behind something like Gambler or Professor Oak, and you kind of at that point understand why something like Blaine's Quiz Show or Blaine's Quiz cards might have been hit, because of ultimately they're, you know, very similar vein. And a lot of players, even now, as they are more versed in the Eternal format ban list, they can see new cards that are being revealed and go, yeah, that's getting banned. And they're right, because it's very clear what kinds of cards end up creating problems in this format with the amount of consistency that the format has. But anyway, that is all for today's Eternal video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you understand the reasons behind these bans, and we'll continue, of course, as time goes on to hit more and more of these. We won't do these every week, maybe every few weeks, and just kind of explore what's on the ban list and why. But is that like that? But that said, I have words. But that said, if you enjoyed today's video, please like it, subscribe if you aren't subscribed, absolutely follow. There's so much cool gameplay in the Eternal format that you should absolutely follow. You should absolutely watch some of the other videos on this channel and enjoy the Eternal format in general, even if it's not on this channel. So thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video.